My name is Dave Wilhelm. I'm an associate professor in the Business Administration Department at Wake Tech Community College in Raleigh, North Carolina. This video presents our Business 110 Introduction to Business course. It covers the entire one semester, 3 credit hour course in an hour and 10 minutes, though in less detail than the full 48-hour course. That's enough introduction. Here we go. This is the short version of Wake Tech Community College Business 110 Introduction to Business course. Products can be either tangible goods or intangible services. Many of them are a combination of the two. Earnings statement is one important indication of how well a company is doing. It covers revenue, expenses, profit, and loss. Other names for it are profit and loss statement, income statement. Two measures of how well an economy or an individual is doing are standard of living and quality of life. Standard of living, how much stuff you've got. Quality of life is the general well-being of an individual or society, looking at things like water quality, freedom, security. There are 5 factors of production. 3 of them are human-related. Those are entrepreneurship, starting businesses, knowledge, primarily using knowledge to accomplish your tasks, and labor, where you're primarily using physical effort to accomplish your tasks. The 2 non-human factors of production are capital and land. In this case, capital refers to capital equipment, not money, as it usually does. Land includes land, natural resources. A business can set their 4 Ps, their marketing mix, any way they want, but they are both constrained and assisted by the business environment. The elements of a business environment are the economic environment, legal and government environment, the competitive environment, the social environment, the technological environment, and the global environment. Economics is how society employs resources to produce products and how they distribute them. Macroeconomics looks at society as a whole or a very large piece of it. Microeconomics looks at a single company or a single small nation. Robert Malthus and Adam Smith are 2 economists. Robert Malthus's hypothesis was that there are too many people and too little food. He was, of course, an advocate of birth control. Adam Smith, the father of modern economics, espoused freedom and said that if governments keep their hands off the economy, everything will go well. He wrote The Wealth of Nations explaining this. There are 4 basic rights of free market capitalism: the right to own private property, the right to run a business and keep the profits, the right to compete, and the right to have a choice. Supply and demand. Supply considers the producers, and there are supply and demand curves. The higher the prices, the more suppliers are likely to supply. Demand refers to how much consumers will want. And of course, consumers will demand more at lower prices. 4 types of competition. Perfect competition looks at many sellers, none particularly powerful or able to control the market, in an undifferentiated product. Monopolistic competition is where the products are pretty similar, but the producers are trying to differentiate them so that they can charge us more money. An oligopoly is a market controlled by 2, 3, 4, a very small number of producers. Automobiles 30 years ago in the US were an oligopoly. Anymore, they're not. A monopoly refers to one organization monopolizing a particular market, though with the Federal Trade Commission, most monopolies are government-regulated monopolies, such as providing water, gas, and electricity to our homes. Some economic indicators. The main one is gross domestic product, which is the total value of goods and services produced by a nation's economy in a year. There is the unemployment rate and the inflation rate. If you add those two together, you get the misery index. There are a number of inflations: inflation, disinflation, deflation, and stagflation. Inflation is the normal year-to-year increase of prices and wages. Disinflation is where prices are still rising, but at a lower rate than the year before. Deflation refers to prices actually going down, and stagflation is a special case where there is a slowing economy, but prices are still rising. A recession is clearly defined as 2 or more consecutive quarters of gross domestic product decline, but in the news, that definition is pretty much ignored. A depression, no clear definition, basically a bad recession. Government economic policy to try to stabilize and improve the economy. President and Congress are responsible for fiscal policy, basically taxes and government spending. The Federal Reserve Board is responsible for monetary policy, which looks at the interest rate at the Federal Reserve and some free market exchanges of currencies. Global markets, importing and exporting. Importing, we buy from other countries. Exporting, we produce and send our goods to those other countries. Comparative advantage theory says that whoever can do something the best and cheapest should do that, and let other countries do what they do best and cheapest, and that is a good basis for trade. Most countries pay attention to the balance of trade. If you export more than you import, you have a balance of trade surplus. If you import more than you export, you have a balance of trade deficit. The U.S.'s trading partners are primary trading partner if one considers the sum of goods back and forth between the two countries. Our number 1 trading partner is Canada, number 2 is China, and number 3 is Mexico. Notice this only refers specifically to goods. This does not include services. There are licensing and contract manufacturing. These work both domestically and globally. Licensing is where an intellectual property holder, such as an artist, would give a license to a manufacturer to, say, make 1,000 prints of a painting and then sell those and pay the intellectual property holder a certain amount for each one sold or some other deal. Contract manufacturing is where the intellectual property holder pays a manufacturer to produce a certain number, and then the intellectual property holder will deal with the consumers. Joint venture and strategic alliance are ways for 2 organizations to compete. A joint venture involves some shared ownership, either of a property, such as a ski resort or a bus or a combine for farmers. Also, some contracts usually involve. Strategic alliance is just an agreement between two organizations defined by contracts. Exchange rate, how much one currency gets for another currency. General agreement on trade and tariffs is an agreement under the auspices of the United Nations, which is a umbrella trade agreement. Individual nations can modify it. The World Trade Organization is the United Nations organization that monitors the global agreement on trade and tariffs and will adjudicate disagreements between countries. A quota only lets so much material into a country each year. Tariffs are fees for bringing imports into a country. Protective tariffs are designed to protect a nation's industry. Revenue tariffs are designed to make money for the country that is charging them. An embargo is where a country will not accept any product, either the product itself or perhaps from a particular country. Free trade agreements and unions are groups of countries that give each other preferred status for trade. Free trade agreements have standard agreements within the country, but those countries deal with external countries independently. Unions, such as the European Union, have standard agreements within the Union, but they also deal the same way with countries outside their union. South America now has UNASUR, which is a combination of the Andes group and Mercosur. For an ethics check, one can ask oneself, is what I'm doing legal? Is what I'm doing balanced? And will it bother my conscience if I do this? There are some things that are ethical but not legal, such as speeding on I-95, some sit-ins and protests. There are 4 generally accepted business operating responsibilities. The 2 basic ones are economic and legal. If a business does not operate economically, they will go out of business. If a business does not operate legally, they will go out of business, and some of the principals may be in jail. Ethical is a responsibility if an organization wants a long-term profitable business relationship with another organization, they have to operate ethically. You might cheat somebody once, but it's not going to go on long. Whether or not there's a philanthropic responsibility or a philanthropic opportunity is up for grabs. Milton Friedman, Nobel Prize winner in economics, says there is no philanthropic responsibility. This is up to the business and the owners. Ethics codes can be integrity-based or compliance-based, and most employee handbooks have both. On the one page is the integrity-based ethic code that says we are good people. We want to treat our customers, our employees, and our suppliers ethically. On the other page is a compliance-based ethics code set up by the lawyers, which basically says if you do this, this is going to be your punishment. How to form a business. There are quite a few ways of owning a business. There are basically 2 things one should consider: the taxation and the liability. Sole proprietorship, one owner, flow-through taxation, unlimited liability. General partnership, all the partners share governance of the organization. They also share unlimited liability. There is a limited liability partnership as well, where the general partners are somewhat isolated by each other. As soon as a single investor wants to invest in a partnership but do not want to have unlimited liability, nor do they want to actively participate in management, they are termed a limited partner, and that partnership is now designated as a limited partnership. Limited liability company has limited liability and flow-through taxation. There is also something called a limited profit limited liability corporation, which is a special case. An S Corp is a C Corp that files a little extra paperwork so that they are taxed in a flow-through manner and still have limited liability. C Corp, this is the type of ownership that can have a single owner, but it can have many owners. They are the ones with what is called double taxation. It's not really double taxation. A C corporation's earnings are taxed once at the C corporation level, and then when the owners receive their dividends, they are taxed again on those dividends. So unlimited liability or sole proprietorship, partnerships, except for the limited partners, limited liability, LLCs, S Corp, C Corps, L3Cs, and B Corps. C Corp is the only one with the double taxation. For unlimited liability, one cure for that is to take out insurance, but I also hear that insurance is not a substitute for limited liability. C corporations are owned by stockholders who elect a board of directors to look after their interests. The board of directors hires, appoints the officers of the corporation, and then there are the worker bee employees. S Corp, limited liability company, and nonprofit are specialized. Mergers and acquisitions, vertical, horizontal, and conglomerate. A vertical, the difference between a merger and an acquisition, in a merger, two organizations get together as equals. In an acquisition, one organization purchases another organization. A vertical merger or acquisition is where an organization acquires by merger or acquisition a supplier or a customer. Horizontal combination is with another organization that's providing the same good or service that we are. This is the one that is most likely to attract attention from the Federal Trade Commission if there's concern about a monopoly. Conglomerate combinations, this is where an automobile company buys a chocolate producer, no relationship. A franchise is a licensing agreement. It's not an ownership form. The franchisor is the large company. The franchisee is the local producer who gets a license from the franchisor to use their brand name, their method of doing business, their products. Franchise fee is a one-time fee for setting up the franchise agreement. Royalty fees are monthly fees based on a percentage of the total revenue of the franchisee that is paid to the franchisor. Entrepreneurship, besides a straight entrepreneur who is anybody who starts a business, an intrapreneur is somebody who starts a business backed up by their organization. A micropreneur is somebody who starts a business with just wanting to have a small business. Small business, as defined by the Small Business Administration, says it has to be an independent business. It has a size part of the definition, either dollars or number of employees, and not dominant in the industry. Every business should have a business plan at some point in time. If it's a big bang business, which requires a lot of initial investment, it should have that business plan initially. If it's an organic business that grows slowly from a hobby or an interest, maybe the business plan can be put off until later. The first thing we want the audience to read is the executive summary. This will hopefully convince them to read the rest of the business plan, and we could be providing this to them looking for an equity investor, a partner, a loan, a key employee. Other sections are the marketing plan, the financial plan, and so on. The business process can be divided into two parts, the entrepreneurship part and the management part. The entrepreneurship part is an innovation, a triggering event, and doing it, called implementation. Once a business is started at some point in time, we move away from the entrepreneurship process into the management process. This includes growth, maturity, and harvest. Eventually, when the principals no longer are interested in the business, hopefully they can sell it to somebody else. If you're wondering what's so innovative about a McDonald's or a Wendy's franchise, that would be the location. Both those organizations spend a lot of time picking out locations. Nobody drives 20 miles for fast food. Other innovations, think Netflix, Redbox. Management functions can be broken down into planning, organizing, leading, doing, and controlling. Planning can be broken down into strategic, tactical, operation, and contingency. Strategic planning is a high-level, long-term planning that looks out 5 to 20 years, depending on the industry. Operational planning is the day, weekly, monthly planning that is probably done by first-level managers. In between those is tactical planning, which is more detailed and immediate than strategic, but not so detailed and immediate as operational. Contingency plans are plans that are in our hip pocket just in case the basic plans don't work. It's not that the basic plans failed or were not sufficient. It's just that they can never cover every possible contingency. That's why we have contingency plans. Controlling, and this works for both people and machines, set standards, compare the actual with the plan, and adjust as needed. 3 types of management skills: technical, human relations, and conceptual. As one advances in an organization, technical skills probably become less important as we move through human relation skills, and conceptual skills become most important. Human relation skills are certainly important for everybody. Mission statement is why the organization exists. Lots of verbs, and we will do this, and we will help our customers do that. A vision is to be verbs with nouns and adjectives. We will be this. Goals and objectives. Goals are those strategic things, high level, arm waving, kind of hard to pin down. Objectives are more detailed. An objective should be very specific, it should be measurable, there should be a time element involved, and it should be assigned to an individual. SWOT analysis looks at the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats of an organization. Leadership styles: autocratic, participative, and free rein. Autocratic is not my way or the highway. It's probably prone to misuse, but for a new employee without skills, you better be autocratic. Hopefully you can move to participative and then free rein. Best leadership style depends on the manager, the employee, and the task to be performed. Henry Fayol was a Frenchman who came up with original principles of organization, and he was very much looking from the top down on how organizations should be run. He has 10 to 20 principles, depending on where you find them, but authority, equity, fairness, division of labor, and a few others. Max Weber, a German, was looking more at the bottom up. He published The Theory of Organizations, and he was very big on job descriptions, written rules, hiring qualified people. Two spans, span of control and span of accountability. Span of control is what resources you have at your disposal. Span of accountability is what you're supposed to do and what you're going to get rewarded or punished for. It's important that your span of accountability does not exceed your span of control, or things will not turn out well. Organization structures can be tall and narrow, or they can be short and wide. The tendency is to go to short and wide organizations. Fortunately, with the internet, communication is much more efficient, so we are able to go to shorter, wider organizations. Line people are the people who perform the primary mission of the organization, probably deal with customers. Staff people may deal with customers. Their primary mission is to support the line people. Core competencies are what we do well. Competitive advantage is how we do better than our competitors. For those core competencies to lead to competitive advantage, they have to be important to the customer, and they have to be difficult to duplicate. Form utility is the utility that's provided by the manufacturer. There are 6 in all. The others are provided by the intermediaries. Process manufacturing changes the nature of a material, for instance, frying an egg. An assembly process assembles bits and pieces, and it is able to be taken apart or disassembled. Continuous processes run a long time between changes, a day, a week. It depends on the industry. Intermittent processes are changed a lot. Computer-aided design and computer-aided manufacturing taken together are called CAD/CAM, and this is where the design equipment is connected to the manufacturing robots. Facility location depends on the resources, energy, transportation, workers. What's important depends on very much the type of facility, whether it's manufacturing, retail, service. Manufacturing facility layouts can be an assembly line, a process where similar workers are grouped together, such as the welders in one area, the painters in another. Modular, instead of just doing one simple task as in an assembly line, an individual or group together assembles a more identifiable piece of equipment. And fixed position is for things like very large airplanes, houses. Just in time refers to a manufacturer being able to have very low inventory. Inventory has 2 costs. The cost of the inventory itself, which you may have had to borrow money to get, and space to store it. Just in time, the manufacturer has a good firm agreement with the supplier so that the manufacturer can count on receiving the goods when they need them, and the supplier can count on a steady customer. Some quality elements are Six Sigma, which means really, really good. Officially, it's like 3.5 bad per million. Statistical process control, championed by W. Edwards Deming. ISO 9000, International Quality Standards. Find the best way to do something and then make sure you do it. ISO 14000 is international recommendations for being nice to the environment. PERT and Gantt charts. PERT charts, also called critical path method, looks at the tasks required to finish a project and finds the best way to improve the project delivery time. PERT charts were developed by the RAND Corporation around 1950. Gantt charts were developed by Joe Gantt real early in the 1900s, and they show a bar on a task that is to be accomplished. This bar chart here, gold is things that should be done, and when some progress is made, they're colored white. PERT charts, good for planning and organizing. Gantt charts are useful for leading and controlling. Motivation. Frederick Taylor, father of scientific management, was partially a time and motion study. Just like ISO 9000, he was 75 years before ISO 9000. He said find the best way to do something and make sure it's done that way. Elton Mayo thought he was a scientific management person, but as a result of the Hawthorne studies, he came up with the principle that people act differently when observed, and in particular, if you treat people nicely, they will perform better. Abraham Maslow has his hierarchy of needs, which range from physiological to safety to social to esteem and self-actualization. Two key points about Maslow: his needs are sequential. That is, we don't worry about self-actualization until the others have been satisfied. And his other point is that once satisfied, they no longer motivate us. Another man called Alderfer had similar hierarchy, but his were just three: existence, relatedness, and growth. And Alderfer did not think they were sequential. He thought they all occurred at once. Frederick Hertzberg came up with motivators that motivate us and hygiene factors which do not motivate us. Most of Hertzberg's motivators had to do with the job itself. The hygiene factors had to do more with the environment, management, administration. Douglas McGregor identified theory X and theory Y. Theory X was people dislike work. Theory Y was people do like work and responsibility. And McGregor's point was, if a manager thinks his people are theory X and treats them like that, they will be theory X. On the other hand, theory Y works the same way. Victor Vroom's expectance theory: before somebody does something, they look at whether effort will actually lead to results and whether the results will lead to a desired outcome. If those links don't work, motivation will not be there. Motivation through job enrichment: depending on the job and the match to the person, maybe the job should be simplified, maybe it should be enlarged. Enrichment: difference between enrichment and enlargement is just adding more stuff. Enrichment is adding some different stuff. And certainly job rotation is a chance to get away from from boredom, or a chance to learn some new skills. A really excellent source for internal and external motivation is Dan Pink. If you go to YouTube and Google Dan Pink, go to YouTube and search Dan Pink, you will find a couple extra videos, one for 10 minutes, one for 20 minutes. I recommend both of those. Human resources management, from the point of view of the organization, the employment steps are recruitment, trying to get people interested, selection, selecting the ones that we would like working for us, training and development, and eventually termination. Termination in all its senses, including the good ones where people retire, leave for another job, also firing, laid off. Some of the human resources legal requirements are the 1964 Civil Rights Act. There are many, but this is probably the most important one. This makes illegal discrimination based on sex, race, color, national origin, or religion. It does not cover age, disabilities, and sexual orientation, though these are covered in other laws. Job analysis looks at the inventory. This is the inventory of people and their skills, both within the company and in the hiring area. If there are fewer people than needed, then we hire more. If there are more people than needed, then we need to reduce the number of employees somehow. Job description describes the job. This is what people's responsibilities and activities are. A job specification, which I'd prefer to be called a worker specification, describes the characteristics of a person who would be likely to fulfill the job description successfully. Appraising employee performance, first establish standards, share them with the employees, measure the actual performance, compare the two, and if they're good, perhaps a reward. If not so good, some correction. Training and development, the simplest is on-the-job training, where you simply watch somebody else. Online, formal apprentice programs, vestibule training, where you train on the identical equipment you'll be using in a real job. Simulation, where you need training, but in air would be too costly, such as in flying large airplanes. Pay systems, salary, hourly, piecework, commission, bonus, profit sharing, probably some others. Fringe benefits, most of these are not required by law, but from a motivational and competitive point of view, they're probably mostly required. Health insurance has recently become required by the government, but I think some of the details are still being worked out. Holidays, vacation, health insurance, life insurance, retirement plans. Unions and employee management issues, primarily focused on unions, and there are three types of unions in existence in the United States today. A union shop, as we call them, anybody can be hired by the company, but after some period of time, typically a month, the new employees have to join the union and start paying dues. Agency shops, in these, the new employee does not have to join the union, but they do have to pay union dues, the theory being that the union is working as their agent with respect to the company. Both of these are generally in states where there is a union security clause. The third type of union shop is an open shop, and in this case, a worker does not have to join the union, nor does he or she have to pay dues if there is a union. There can be unions in open shop companies. These are generally where there are states' right-to-work laws. The two on the end with the big red X's are, one is yellow dog contracts, which is not actually a union shop. This is a contract where before being hired, a worker would have to sign a pledge not to join a union. On the other end is a closed shop, which was also outlawed. This required a person to join a union before they could be hired. In disagreements, union tactics are generally strikes, boycotts, primary or secondary. Primary boycotts are legal, secondary are not. Management tactics include lockouts and strike breakers. Strike breakers are called freedom workers if you're on management side, and scabs if you are favoring the union. Some resolutions are a cooling off period, which may be required by the government if you are in an industry critical to the economy. Injunction is a court order requiring people to do or not do something. Mediation and arbitration are where third parties are brought in to help reach a resolution. Mediation, the mediators come in and try and help the two parties work through their differences. Arbitration, arbitrators are actually given the authority to make a binding decision. Two types of sexual harassment: quid pro quo, sleep with me and I give you a raise and a promotion. Don't sleep with me and I'm going to fire you. That's something for something, quid pro quo. Hostile work environment is more indirect, where either because of the environment or other employees, the work environment is such that it affects the work of somebody. The hostile work environment, sexual harassment does not have to be directed at the person, but if they're aware of it, it can affect their work. Marketing errors. Marketing, helping buyers buy. Early in the country was a production error where anything we could make, somebody would need. Eventually, when our production got up and there was competition, we took an active part in promoting or selling the product. Then marketing, where we asked the customers what they might like before producing it. And currently we're in the customer relation area, where we've recognized that we don't want to sell the customer just one thing, we want to keep them coming back. The marketing mix are 4 P's that a company has control over in offering to potential customers: are the product itself, price, promotion, and place or delivery. Marketing research includes both initial exploratory research and final descriptive research. There is secondary data that's already out there and primary data that is gathered specifically for this project. Some types of marketing research are a focus group, almost informal group of 6 to 12 people with a moderator to discuss a topic. A survey, either interview if it's oral or written if it's a questionnaire. Observation, just watching, and experiments, manipulating the environment. Experiments are sort of observation where you manipulate the environment. Market segmentation, splitting the potential market in various ways so we know how to customize the marketing mix, the 4 P's. Geographic, where people are. Demographic, their characteristics. Psychographic, their lifestyle. Benefit, what they're going to do with it. And volume, how much they purchase. The consumer decision-making process is first recognizing a want or need, gathering information, evaluating the alternatives, making a decision, and then later evaluating the decision. The actual process is not as linear as is displayed here. There's a lot of feedback. Outside influences on what consumers buy, first of all, the marketing mix, and then their own psychology, their socio-cultural identity, and the situation. Developing and pricing. A product mix includes all the multiple product lines of an organization. For instance, toothpastes would be a product line, hand lotion a product line. Put them all together and you have an organization's product mix. A product extension is extending a product, perhaps extending it from hand lotion to foot lotion, whereas a product expansion is jumping into a whole new area, such as a hand lotion manufacturer deciding to market motorcycles. Goods are tangible, services are intangible. Convenience are those we buy every day. Shopping are the ones that we spend a little time thinking and looking for. Specialty are those things we've been dreaming about for years, and finally we've decided to possibly buy one, and we are going to do a very thorough job of finding the right one. Finally, those unsought goods or services, funerals, life insurance, car insurance. Brands, manufacturers, or national brands are things like Honda, Dell. Dealer or private label brands are things like Sears, whose batteries are made by 4 different organizations. The private brands of Harris Teeter, Kroger. Generic brands are not really brands. These are generally just labeled green beans or whatever. And knockoff brands are where they will sell things that try to look and sound like a manufacturer or national brand, but really are, such as a Polex watch. New product development process, an idea. Screen the product primarily for technical aspects. Analysis, product analysis, primarily focused on whether one can make a profit doing this. Developing the product, testing it, and finally commercialization, which means things like pricing it, setting up a promotional program, determining the distribution channel. Most products have a life cycle. They are introduced, they grow, they mature, and finally they decline. The 2 major pricing strategies are cost-based, where we start with the manufacturing cost and work up to the consumer price. The other is market or competition-based, where we look at what consumers are willing to pay and what other businesses in the same industry are charging, and work back to the manufacturing cost to see if we can make it cheaply enough for this to be a viable, profitable product. Pricing tactics, skimming, setting the price high, either permanent or temporarily. Penetration, pricing low to get lots of volume and perhaps squeeze other competitors out of the market. Everyday low pricing, think Walmart, Aldi's. High-low, those organizations with lots of sales, think Kroger, Harris Teeter, Food Lion. Line pricing, men's suits, where some of the suits are $400, $300, another line is $200. And finally, psychological pricing, as if anybody is really fooled into thinking $3.98 is significantly less than $4. Break-even analysis, this is the point at which there is no profit and no loss. Break-even quantity is determined by dividing the fixed cost by the margin, the profit for each individual item. Margin can be expressed as selling price minus variable cost. Distribution. The standard distribution channel from a producer to a consumer is typically producer to a wholesaler to a retailer to a consumer. Not every producer goes through the entire wholesaler retailer chain. They could go straight to consumers, straight to retailers. This is business. Whatever works well, somebody will do. A consumer service is generally straight from the producer to the consumer. Most services, like an airplane ride, you cannot stock and sell at a different time. The service is provided at the same time it's produced. Business goods or services are generally straight from the producer to the business, though incidentals like paper clips, I'm sure somebody just runs over to a nearby retailer. The difference between a distribution channel from the producer to the consumer and a supply chain is that the supply chain includes the producer's suppliers. There are generally considered to be 6 utilities. These are actions that help to get the good or service to the consumer. The form utility is provided by the producer. They actually make whatever it is, the good or service that the consumer wants. Intermediaries provide the rest of the services: time utility, place utility, typically provided by stores, possession utility, credit and delivery, information provided by lots of folks, and service utilities after the sale, fixing things. You don't actually need the intermediaries themselves. You do need their services somehow. Merchant wholesalers are the intermediary we're probably most familiar with. Full service, rack jobbers, drop shippers. Retailers are intermediaries. Department store, discount store, supermarket, warehouse club, kiosks, quite a few others. Merchant wholesalers and retailers do take title to the goods, at least for some period of time. That is to say, they own them. Agents and brokers are also intermediaries, but they do not take title to the goods. Agents are generally employed by the seller or the buyer. Brokers are independent. 3 retail distribution strategies are intensive, selective, and exclusive. Intensive are where the producer, wholesaler, retailer wants to get the product out as many places as they can because they're used a lot. Think of bread, milk, eggs, cheese. Selective distribution isn't everywhere. It's probably, for instance, clothing you're going to find at clothing stores. Exclusive distribution is where there's not that much of a market, and it's probably a specialty good. So Rolls-Royce automobiles, they probably only have one dealership per region, whatever a region is exactly. Transportation, sea or water, it's the slowest but also the cheapest. I believe container ships pretty soon will be able to hold 15,000 of the standard containers. Railroad, trucks, air is the fastest but also the most expensive. Pipelines are specialized: gas, oil, a coal slurry. The first and last mile of transportation is very likely to be by trucks. Perhaps the trucks take it to a railroad, or a sea terminal or an airport, but unless you actually have a railroad spur coming right to your factory, you're probably going to ship some stuff by trucks. Promotion. The promotion mix includes advertising, paid, non-personal messaging, personal selling, sales promotion, those short-term promotions trying to get immediate action from a customer, and public relations or publicity. Public relations, basically trying to get a favorable image for the organization or person. Publicity is free promotion, but the organization does not have control over it. Advertising, paid, non-personal, can be on TV, radio, magazines, direct mail, internet, social media, product placement, where you get your product on another show. The sales process, and this can refer to business or business to consumer. They're listed as different. If you combine them, it's prospect and qualify and a pre-approach. Those are typically just business to business. Approach, ask questions, a presentation, those three are for both. Answer objections, close a sale, and follow up. Promotional strategies are push, where we push the product through the distribution channel. That is, the producer's promotion goes to the wholesalers and the retailers, and perhaps the agents and brokers, whereas pull promotion tries to pull the product through the consumers by getting them to request it from their retailers or wholesalers. Most drug manufacturers do a lot of pull promotion, where we are shown a terrible disease and suggest we ask our doctor about this. Accounting and financial information. The accounting process is getting the source material, putting it in journals, which are chronological, in ledgers, which are categories, a trial balance, developing the statements, and then the analysis of the statements. Today, with all this done by computers, I'm not sure how separable some of these individual process steps are. Managerial accounting looks to support the internal operation of a business. Financial accounting is primarily to report to external people in organization what's going on in an organization financially. Three main accounting statements are the balance sheet, the earnings statement, and cash flow statements. There are others. Each has an equation. The balance sheet, assets equals liabilities plus owner's equity. Earnings statement, earnings equal revenue minus expenses. Cash flow, end cash equals beginning cash plus receipts minus disbursements. Note the difference in terminology. The earnings statement is revenue and expenses. The cash flow is receipts and disbursements. Balance sheet is at a point in time. Earnings statement and cash flow are for a time period. Ratio analysis looks at the liquidity, ability to pay bills, leverage, amount of debt, profitability, activity such as inventory, time, and time to collect bills, and finally some market ratios. Each of these can be done comparing them to other organizations or looking at how the ratios change within an organization over time. Financial management there are forecasts, there are plans, and there are budgets. Forecasts are a guess. Plan is a hope. Budgets are where you make things happen. The budget allocates resources. Budgets, we have a capital budget, think of equipment. A cash budget, supported by the cash flow statements, and then all the individual budgets are gathered together into an operating or master budget. To finance an organization, you can use equity or debt. Equity is ownership. Equity is always long-term. You're not going to sell a piece of the company to get by a 1 or 2 month crisis. First equity is from yourself, then friends and family, perhaps venture capitalists, angel investors. Debt, borrowing, can be long-term or short-term, certainly credit cards, friends and family, trade credit, banks, finance companies, bonds, IOUs, factoring. Factoring is basically selling accounts receivable, line of credit, and probably some other ways. Securities markets. There are 3 main types of financial institutions in the United States: commercial banks, insurance companies, and investment bankers. Investment bankers invest on their own behalf and on the behalf of their clients. They also assist companies in initial public offerings to exchange stocks and bonds. There are, in the U.S., 26 physical stock exchanges and 5 electronic exchanges. Over these, people buy and sell stocks, bonds, mutual funds, a few other financial instruments. There are many, many stock exchanges worldwide. In the U.S., the New York Stock Exchange is probably the most prestigious and well-known. American Stock Exchange was purchased by New York Stock Exchange and is now the New York Stock Exchange Market LLC. There is also NASDAQ, the National Association of Securities Dealers Automatic Quotation, an online stock exchange, and there's over-the-counter. Some specialized stock exchanges are mercantile and futures exchanges, which primarily deal with commodities, wheat, oats, coal, and so forth. The Securities and Exchange Commission is the government organization that is tasked with making sure the stock exchanges operate ethically and legally. There are 2 categories of stock, common and preferred, and these are categories, not specific types of stock, because a very specific type of stock is included in the stock prospectus and the stock contract. Common and preferred stock categories differ as far as voting rights and dividends. In general, common stock gets to vote, and if there are enough earnings, they will receive dividends. Generally, preferred stock does not have voting rights, but they do have first dibs on dividends. To make money in a stock, you can make money 2 ways. One is by the value of the stock appreciating, that is, if you can sell it for more than you bought it for. And the other way is by collecting dividends based on the earnings of the stock you own. There's something called a stock split, whose primary goal is to make stock affordable. And if a stock gets too high in price, that could affect its liquidity, making it harder to buy and sell. So a company could reduce the value of its stock. They would do this by a stock split. For instance, if you had 10 shares of stock at $20, with a stock split, you would now have 20 shares of stock at $10. The number of shares times the value has not changed. There is no gain or loss in a stock split. There's also something called a reverse stock split. If a company's stock has gotten too low to qualify to be on a stock exchange, New York Stock Exchange has requirements on both capitalization as well as the stock price. Bonds are also traded on the stock exchange. A bond is basically a promise to pay some interest and at some point in time repay the face amount of the bond. Mutual funds are probably the favorite way for most private individuals to invest. Mutual funds collect various stocks and bonds, package them together, and sell them through stock exchanges. Something called asset allocation. Mutual funds make this fairly easy, and allocation and diversification are geared toward not investing in a single stock where you could get very rich or very poor, but spreading out the investments. There are a number of market indicators. There is the Dow Jones Industrial Average of 30 stocks. Standard & Poor's has a whole lot of various indices, as does Value Line. The legal environment, there is common law and statutory law. Common is tradition and judicial decisions. Statutory law, laws passed by statutes. Warranties can be expressed and implied. Expressed warranties are written. They can also be verbal, though a verbal express warranty is harder to prove than a written one. Implied warranties are implied by just the nature of the good or service. For instance, if one buys a bicycle, it's an implied warranty. You're going to have wheels and pedals and so forth. Contract law, for a valid contract, it requires offer, acceptance, consideration, which in this case means something of value, competence, legal age, not drunk. It has to be for something legal. Delivery of illegal drugs is not a contract. And it has to be in the proper form, which basically means for certain things it has to be written. Some antitrust legislation. Clayton Act, Federal Trade Commission, Robinson-Patman. These generally look to encourage competition and discourage monopolies. Intellectual property. There are 3 types of intellectual property that have to be registered with the government. Patents typically last 20 years, though there are exceptions. Copyrights, life of the owner plus 70 years. If it's personal, if it's done for an organization, there are different rules. Trademarks, such as McDonald's M, can last forever as long as they're in active use and re-registered every 10 years or so. There are many types of intellectual property that are not registered that people tend to forget about, such as customer lists and trade secrets. There are a number of types of bankruptcy. Bankruptcy is not when you can't pay your bills. When you can't pay your bills, you're insolvent. That's a financial status. Bankruptcy is a legal status. Now, insolvency may lead to bankruptcy, but they are 2 separate things. Bankruptcy can be voluntary, or it can be involuntary, generally insisted upon by the creditors who go to court. There are quite a few chapters for bankruptcy. The ones we're interested are 7, 11, and 13. Notice they're all prime numbers. Chapter 7 is not lucky. This is when a person or organization says, I can't do it, I'm done. Chapter 11 is mostly for large organizations, and this is reorganization. Most U.S. airlines have been in Chapter 11 at one time or another, and they work with their creditors to come up with a repayment scheme, probably not 100% of the original payment, but if the creditors will not accept partial payment, there's always the threat that the organization could go to Chapter 7 bankruptcy. Chapter 13 bankruptcy is a repayment for small organizations or individuals. That's it. I hope you found it either interesting or useful, maybe even both. If you have questions or comments, send me an email with 1 hour business 110 in the subject line.